reviewed, highest grossing films of all time. I'm going to explain the subject right away. But first, who likes movies? I know I do. Oh, great. What do we like more than to watch movies? We like to talk about them, to criticize them, to analyze them. Well, there are people who get to do just that and get paid for that. They can be film scholars that publish their academic criticism, or they can be film critics who work for newspapers and magazines and websites. And they usually criticize new releases. Now, I'm going to focus on them because moviegoers around the world use their reviews in order to decide whether or not to purchase a ticket for a certain movie. So there are three possible scenarios. The reviews are mostly positive, and the film is a financial success. It's quite acceptable. The reviews are mostly negative, and the film is unsuccessful, which is quite logical. And the most interesting one is scenario number 3. The reviews are mostly negative, but the film is successful. Very interesting. So this is why I'm going to focus on this one. So my question is, what are the worst reviewed, highest grossing movies of all time? How do we even begin to answer this question? Anyone familiar with RottenTomatoes.com?
The Room is the worst.
RottenTomatoes.com is a leading website that aggregates reviews from all of the major media outlets. Now the website staff decides whether or not the review is positive, fresh, or negative, rotten. A movie that receives all negative reviews will receive a 0% rating on the tomato rating. Okay, so we need a formula that will help us to compare between films. So the formula is, we take the box office total, and we divide it by the tomato meter rating, which is the percentage of positive reviews, and we get a balanced unit of comparison. For example, the film Bruce Almighty generated $484 million worldwide. We divide it by the percentage of positive reviews presented in the website RottenTomatoes.com, and we get 9.9 units. So the question is, what is the film that has the largest range between the box office total and the percentage of positive reviews? So after all the calculations have been done, the top 5 worst reviewed, highest grossing movies of all time are, at number 5, we have one of my favorite comedies, but the critics didn't feel the same. Let's see what the critics felt. The New York Post said this film is sloppy and not funny enough. The New York Times wrote it is cheap fun. And the San Francisco Chronicle said the picture doesn't come close to approaching the near classic quality of the earlier film. And despite these harsh reviews, this is one of the most famous comedies of all time, generating $516 million on a relatively small budget. It is, of course, Meet the Fockers, the second installment of the famous franchise. At number 4, we have one of my favorite childhood films. Let's see what the critics had to say. The San Francisco Chronicle, An Ugly Mess. The Chicago Sun-Times with Roger Ebert. Roger Ebert is the world's most famous film critic. He said it is loud, ugly, and fragmented. The Los Angeles Times wrote, undone by its grandiosity. It is one of the most famous, despite its reviews, one of the most famous disaster science fiction movies of all time. It is also the #1 grossing film of 1998. Okay? Any clues? It surpassed Saving Private Ryan film by Steven Spielberg. It is, of course, Armageddon. So number 3, we have, I haven't seen this movie actually, but Let's see what the critics have to say. The San Francisco Chronicle said the story is so impenetrable. Took me like a week to say this word correctly. Impenetrable, so impossible to grasp hold of that viewers sit there wondering if they had a stroke. Thank you. The New York Post wrote, after 3 hours of adrift, you'll beg for the bank. And the Seattle Post wrote, the story is lost at sea. You probably already know the movie. It is the highest grossing movie of 2007, and it is the most expensive film ever made. It is, of course,
Titanic.
I guess Titanic.
No. 2007.
Oh.
Pirates of the Caribbean at the World's End. The second movie of the franchise. Number 2, it is an adaptation, you're probably all familiar with. Very successful one, but the critics felt it doesn't deserve the money. The Chicago Tribune said, how can a film contain so many clues, yet remain utterly clueless? The Rolling Stone wrote, a dreary, drawing, dull-witted adaptation, and the Boston Globe wrote, a small, surprisingly ordinary movie. It is the second highest grossing film of 2006. It was so successful it created protests around the world blaming the film for being a blasphemy and shames the Christian faith. It is, of course...
The one that cries.
No one knows. What's wrong with you? The Da Vinci Code. At the first place, ladies and gentlemen, one of the worst reviewed movies of all time, the worst reviewed movies that generated the highest gross is Roger Ebert said about this film, a horrible experience of unbearable length, briefly punctuated by 3 or 4 amusing moments. The Chicago Tribune, a 150-minute stimulation of life in a garbage disposal. And the New York Post wrote, this bloated movie is probably the first to require a dose of Ritalin to get through all 2.5 hours. But this time the critics had to eat their hat because it is the 23rd highest grossing film of all time internationally, and it generated $402 million in North America alone. Despite this box office success, it also received the Razzie Award for Worst Film. Any suggestions?
Alice.
Alice? No. No, Alice. It is, of course, Transformers. Revenge of the Fallen. So, in conclusion, how can a movie become successful despite harsh reviews? Mostly harsh reviews. Well, first, it should have famous actors, producers, directors. For example, the director of the Transformers is Michael Bay, and the producer is Steven Spielberg. Okay? Now, it should spend lots of money on merchandise and marketing. It can be an adaptation of an international bestseller. And of course, it must be a sequel to a first successful film. Thank you for listening. Any questions? Yes?
You talked only about the films that get low critics and are still successful.
Mm-hmm.
What about the ones that are the other way? Get high critics and
Well, because
still
there
no success.
are a lot of movies like that. For example, the highest grossing movie of 2009 and 2010 is Avatar. Okay? It was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Motion Picture. But the one that won is Hurt Locker. Is the critics loved it much more than Avatar, but no one seen this movie.
So how does such a thing
I don't know. I think it's a bit more interesting to analyze film that did well despite just because people maybe don't understand art the way they should understand. The mass of people don't understand art the way they should. So there are good films that people don't get to see, but it's interesting to see what kind of films did well despite like scholars that believe that this film sucks.
Okay, great.
Thank you.